became very indignant and restless whenever he happened to hear of some new device of King Apelles for getting what was necessary. And once, while talking with the king himself, our naive young countryman could not restrain himself, but expressed to his face his indignation and his views of this unconscionable conduct of King Apelles towards his subjects. Not only did King Apelles not fly into a temper, as usually happens on the planet Earth when somebody pokes his nose where he has no business, nor did he pitch him out by the scruff of his neck, but he even talked it over with him and discussed the reasons for his severity. They talked a great deal, and the result of the whole of their conversation was precisely a wager. That is to say, they made an agreement and set it down on paper, and each of them signed it with his own blood. Among other things, there was included in this agreement that for the obtaining from his subjects of all that was necessary, King Apelles should be obliged to employ thereafter only those measures and means which should be indicated by our countrymen. And in the event that all his subjects should fail to contribute all that which, according to custom, was required, then our countrymen would become responsible for everything. And he pledged himself to procure for the treasury of King Apelles as much as was necessary for the maintenance and further aggrandizement of the capital and of the whole community. And so, my boy, King Apelles did indeed from the very next day fulfill very honorably the obligation which, according to the agreement, he had assumed. And he conducted the whole government of the country exactly according to the indications of our young countrymen. The results of a government of this kind, however, very soon proved to be quite the opposite of those expected by our simpleton. The subjects of that community, principally, of course, those in whom the sad consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer had already been crystallized, not only ceased to pay into King Apelles' treasury what was required, but they even began gradually snatching back what had been put in before. As our countryman had undertaken to contribute what was needed, and furthermore had signed his undertaking with his blood, and you know, don't you, what the voluntary undertaking of an obligation, especially when signed with his blood, means to one of our tribe. He had, of course, soon to begin making up to the treasury all that was short. He first put in everything he had himself, and afterwards everything he could get from his nearests, dwelling also there on the planet Earth. And when he had drained dry his nearests there, he addressed himself for assistance to his nearests dwelling on the planet Mars. But soon on the planet Mars also everything ran dry, and still the treasury of the city of Samlios demanded more and again more. Nor was the end of its needs in sight. And it was just then that all the kinsmen of this countryman of ours became alarmed, and thereupon they decided to address themselves to me, with the request to help them out of their plight. So, my boy, when we arrived in the said city, I was met by all the beings of our tribe, both old and young, who had remained on that planet. In the evening of the same day, a general meeting was called to confer together to find some way out of the situation that had arisen. To this conference of ours, there was also invited King Apelles himself, with whom our elder countrymen had already previously had many talks on this matter with this aim in view. At this first general conference of ours, King Apelles, addressing himself to all, said as follows: "Impartial friends, I personally am deeply sorry for what has occurred, and what has brought about so many troubles for those assembled here, and I am distressed in all my being that it is beyond my power to extricate you from your prospective difficulties. You must know indeed," King Apelles continued, that the machinery of the government of my community, which has been wound up and organized during many centuries, is at the present time already radically changed, and to revert to the old order is already impossible without serious consequences, namely without those consequences which must doubtless evoke the indignation of the majority of my subjects. The present situation is such that I alone am not able to abolish what has been created without provoking the mentioned serious consequences, and I therefore beg you all in the name of justice to help me deal with it. Still further, he then added, I bitterly reproach myself in the presence of you all, because I also am greatly to blame for all these misfortunes. And I am to blame because I ought to have foreseen what has occurred, since I have existed in these conditions longer than my opponent and your kinsman, namely, he with whom I made the agreement known to you. To tell the truth, it was unpardonable of me to risk entering into such conditions with a being who, although he may be of much higher reason than I, is nevertheless not so practiced in such affairs as I am. Once more I beg all of you, and your right reverence in particular, to forgive me, and to help me out of this sad plight, and enable me to find some issue from the situation that has been created. With things as they now are, I can at present do only what you will indicate. After King Apollys had left, we decided the same evening to select from among ourselves several experienced elderly beings who should weigh together that same night all the data and draw up a rough plan for further action. The rest of us then departed on the understanding that we should assemble the ensuing evening at the same place. But to this second conference of ours, King Apollys was not invited. When we assembled the next day, one of the elder beings, elected the night before, first reported as follows. We pondered and deliberated the whole night upon all the details of this lamentable event, and as a result we have unanimously come to the conclusion, first of all, that there's no way out but to revert to the former conditions of government. Further, we all, and also unanimously, agreed that to return to the former order of government must indeed inevitably provoke a revolt of the citizens of the community, and of course that there will certainly follow all those consequences of revolt which have already become inevitable in such circumstances during recent times on earth. And of course, as has also become usual here, many of those so-called power-possessing beings of this community will suffer terribly, even possibly to the degree of their complete destruction. And above all, it seemed impossible that King Apollys could escape such a fate. Thereafter we deliberated in order, if possible, to devise some means of diverting the said unhappy consequences, at least from King Apollys himself.